Uh, Welcome. I'll stay seated down. Seated, because I've got to work this computer because we're also doing it on Zoom. So we've trying to work out how best to do this. Again, very complicated, all this technology. So we're also recording it. So and that will go out. So the first thing is, if you haven't already, if you can, sometime before leaving, she's walking out the door now, register with Nicola, because that way we can send you the contact, the recording, and any follow-up on the follow-up stuff we do. Keep everybody there. So I've just reminded to record it as well, so got that bit right. So what's this afternoon about? Well, just quickly. There we go. Likes different buttons, different times. Firstly, the welcome, which I've said welcome, and we've shut the doors now, so the polar winds will not be carrying on through the room, although it's nice to have it well aired. Got Bruce from Visit Falmouth.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Some people I know, some people I don't.
We've got Mike Steele, who works for me. He does all the work really. I just do all the talking. But no, quite seriously. We got Nicola at the back and Amy somewhere hiding, but she might be looking out for some late arrivals. I'll explain this isn't a Visit Cornwall thing. You'll see all those logos along the bottom. There's been quite a bit of work slowly over time, and probably the debate about registration schemes has probably been going on for at least 5, 6, probably even longer years at times. A lot of it because of the new online platforms, Airbnb being one of many, and the real worry about that. So we've been working on this for a while. Cornwall Council have indicated that they will be looking for this in the devolution deal to be able to bring something in. And what we want to do today, and there is no real hidden agenda, well, there isn't a hidden agenda, is we've been working on this. We want to share our working because we feel that if there is going to be a scheme, and you can say there shouldn't be, but the meeting this morning was generally part one positive, that we want to make sure it's designed with the industry and with the sector and get that bit really right. So we've done the introductions. So the core focus is to ensure that all accommodation providers are legal and safe. That's the key issue, and it is the all. But I think the challenge with all these things is to keep it, and very jargonistic, but it is government language, proportionate, but it's also got to be effective. So you don't want it over-engineered, but equally you don't want it under-engineered or not actually having the effect it should have. And that's a balance. And again, it comes back to the situation of wanting to make sure we're, as a sector, not Visit Cornwall and the associations, but wider than that, deeply involved in its development. Does it? Sorry, it chooses different buttons when I press this thing. I hope it is. I presume it's on the same thing on the back. Thank you. That means somebody wants to come in now. Sorry. You'll know when people are wanting to arrive because it comes up on there as well. So that's the core principle about proportionate and effective. But the primary things is safety of guests, the advice and support for those that are coming into the sector, be them providers or new people, hosts on things. It would provide incredibly powerful data. In my old role over a decade ago at the Regional Tourist Board, and because of structural changes and all sorts, the last time anybody did a bed count in Cornwall, I can tell you, was about 2008. So 14 years ago, and before any platforms. And although we have data on platforms, nobody really knows. So that data is very important about NHS planning, down to things like minor injuries units and all sorts of things, as well as other aspects. So the data aspects is very powerful. And last, but actually not least, and this is where we started from really, in many ways of people getting frustrated, is that it's a level playing field. Nobody should mind about competition in a free market, but is everybody complying to the same set of rules? Let that person in. Let somebody else in. I'm going to give the next slide. Oh, that's doing it now. different button every time. So the next bit is just going through the backgrounds, the principles, and how we're thinking it would operate, and the fact that there will be fees and the basis of the fees. Good. So as I said, I think 2010 was the start of something, but probably really 2015, all the way through really growing concerns, and not just amongst businesses, amongst tourist boards, but the Tourism Alliance, which we're a member of. And other people, and the fact that other areas, the platforms are, and everybody is actually, it's a more regulated system in the nicest possible way. And the real problem is that lots of people entering it didn't believe that the rules applied because it was a new platform. It was only a distribution system. So we had those issues. The Professional Association of Self-Caterers, Alistair Andyside's their executive chair, but also Southwest Tourism Alliance, and worked with him. We did actually wonder what the legal position was. So there were about 20 or so organisations. We acted as a sort of coordinator, treasurer and contractor to get legal opinion. So I think we spent £12,000-ish on a QC to get the legal opinion on the position of online platforms. And you spent £12,000 to be talked by a leading QC that it's a bit of a grey area. Money well spent. But what they were really saying is that the defense that the online platforms would say is we're no different to a newspaper, we're just a distribution platform. And we do nudge people. There was a very grey area, but to be honest, to pursue it, you would be into millions because you'd have to go, it wasn't a black and white situation. What that did do though, particularly with Airbnb and the government, is actually moves them to start the process of a consultation process, because it sort of raised up the agenda. So it was actually money well spent because it triggered that reaction, particularly that the government could also be made liable. It was one of the things if it turned out that they hadn't taken the safety of people carefully enough, defendable maybe or not. So Airbnb has suggested a system, or suggested there should be a system, and they're talking about very light touch, maybe only businesses only come on for a while, not being qualified, which is not what we agree with. So, and others in the online platform say it'd be a free registration. In Airfeeding, a free registration actually means you couldn't actually do much with it. It'd be like giving people the illusion of something, but actually without the resources to help assist and enforce, it's actually meaningless. And many years ago, an English teacher taught me that the word policy and police go together. You can't have a policy unless you're going to police it. So you do need to have a mechanism, but again, it should be proportionate. And for the ANARACs, the 1969 Tourism Development Act actually had a registration scheme built into it. Most places you go on the continent, there's normally a certificate in the hotel or accommodation. Registration schemes are very common. So actually, in a strange way, it would need modification and amending, but it needs no primary legislation, this. So what that means is it doesn't have to go through Parliament of first reading, second reading, House of Lords. What it needs is an amendment or a statutory function, which could actually be put through Parliament in an hour, in an afternoon, if not 10 minutes, because it's existing legislation. But what we want to do is make sure that it's actually, if we go down this route, somebody else, that on the mouse a minute. Well, actually, for those on Zoom, could you mute, please? Because you might get some feedback otherwise. So it had to be fee-based to cover the work, but also it could actually help on communication. We'll come on to that later. And as I said, particularly Bruce beside me, we've done a lot of work. There can be up to 60 to 70 regulations, depending on the type of business you're operating. This is not about bringing in a new regulation. It's about making sure people are informed and helped and assisted and realize they've got to comply with the existing regulations. And as far as I know, nobody's ever told me I'm wrong. I don't think any of those regulations have come in before any accidents. They always come in afterwards. So fire regs, safety, Legionella, all those things tend to come in. Natasha's law has come in after an incident. So it's in as though it should be there, but we've just got to get it right. Does the graph come up?
Unfortunately, I think it's stuck.
Is that?
Yeah. A few people come back saying it's not moved.
All right. Do you mind while we take 2 minutes out to correct something? Because it's not fair on those.
So there's several people stuck on the first slide.
Right, what we're going to do is, I love technology. I'll stop sharing. Go away. Just stop sharing. Does that stop sharing?
Let's start sharing.
Does that come up with?
That's come up with, yeah. Do you want to flick to the next slide and then back again?
Maybe it's the one I'm.
Yep, that's moving there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, online. Are we back up there? Are we?
Back up.
Do you know, I used to like the old OHPs. You just put it on a thing and it worked. So, you know, when you look at the evidence, you know, just from 2016, and I've got 2022 data starting to come through. That's coming in. You know, you see there from 1,100 in 2016 to 17,000. In fact, I looked in April at the data and there were 15,000 operators on Airbnb and Vrbo. That's the only two data we get. Now in there will be, you know, will be fully professional operators who use the platform. In there will be people who are doing it absolutely right, because that's why I don't demonize. But in there will be some people who ignore the rules, or actually most of them who don't realize what the rules are. You know, they're innocently doing it, thinking it doesn't apply. The other issues in there is the Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service risk-based program did pull out that they would really like a registration scheme, and that was adopted by the council. And that's so not that they can go around and jump on people, it's so they can do risk assessments and advisory visits. So if somebody is in a, you know, in an apartment somewhere where it could be a real risk as opposed to being in the middle of a field, they could actually do it and are quite happy to do those things. The police have an interesting in passing thing, but the chief constable is actually, although he's retiring, but the police generally say on some of the things like county lines where they use different short stay places to distribute drugs, it would be useful for them to know when somebody reports something of whether that's residential or short stay. Because these people do take several places, and the same, unfortunately, on prostitution. Those are sort of secondary ones, but the main ones go back to that safety of the guest. Clicking this thing now. Has it moved?
Yeah.
So it's not just Visit Cornwall. That's why we've tried to put it out in the press, and you know, if non-member, it doesn't matter. Been working with all those associations, and Bruce has been a stalwart in this. I should have given more credit this morning. But the fact is, we do receive, because although Visit Cornwall, you know, it's not part of the council, we do receive lots of complaints. Particularly last summer, I had to say, and that was about dirty and not from safe, minor safety issues. If it's a major safety issue, we could get the public protection out, but minor sort of issues, they just haven't got the resources, especially last year. So if it's something that could cause injury and serious injury or threat of death, yes, we could get them out. Otherwise, they couldn't. They're also instigating a national consultation. And to our mind, within Cornwall, as I said, they are looking at it within the devolution deal as part of the thing. So is Devon, so is Cumbria and other places. That we want this open conversation to see about how we would work and shape it rather than have it done to us. So that's that one. So as I said, 15,000 in April. I think last year it topped out about 24,000 on it. A system called Air DNA, which basically tells you what's on those other sites. And as I said, the danger is a significant number don't meet all the regulations just through ignorance. And I think last year there were a lot of people that jumped on it for just 4 or 5 weeks, moved out. And I dare say some of them actually, I know my house wouldn't qualify for it. So that's the issue. So the one thing is, and this is make this very clear, you know, it's no new regulation, it's a registration system. So if somebody goes sailing, so I'm going to go off on a tangent now, but it does make sense. Somebody goes sailing, I buy a radio for the boat, I have to register it for safety purposes, and I have to go on and take 10 minutes or so. So the way we see this working, I'll go through it again, is an online system, name, rank, serial number, details of the size of the business, upload the fire risk assessment, upload details or details of insurance, might be something else, but not that. The maximum 1 hour is that people might have to update things before they put them up, and they might have to go and find them. So, you know, we could see that you could say 10, 15 minutes, but that's if you're ready. So that's it. As I said, a fee-based system, and somebody's going to ask about the fees, and that's what's got to be determined. It could be a scale, but, you know, maximum of anything from 50 to 200. We haven't quite worked it out. We'd have to work it out on a better budget thing. But part of that is about ongoing education, training and advice to everybody. So it's not just about it. And the enforcement levels is actually the last resort, and public protection in Cornwall, give them more credit. That's their thing, educate, advise, support. But if people then don't take it, then enforce, unless it's really serious, in which case they're doing it. As I said, we've done the data bit. I won't overflow that one. It would have to be probably Cornwall Council. Certainly wouldn't be Visit Cornwall. There's nothing, you know. But what we would want to see, as I said, is an open book and strictly at the cost recovery. And that's why, again, I think it's quite useful as a sector across Cornwall, from the associations and non-members, everybody else, and the ideas of working groups to set up, is that we make sure that it is proportionate again, particularly on cost and light, and takes into account things like large providers. It could be a major hotel. The highest risk is probably the single operator doing it without knowledge. The lowest risk is probably a highly professional, larger operator with systems already in place. So we've got to get that, because it's no good saying it's 50 quid per unit. Then you go to Hendra Holiday Park and say it's 50 quid per unit for the whole lot. That would be nonsense. It would probably be a different model of doing it. So when I talk about things like that, it is different. It's changed. Mm-hmm. So as I said, I think I've probably covered this. The way it would work, as I said, is that, and then what people would get is a registration number. Now, this is the system that's used in many parts of the world. So going back to the online travel agents, if you go to Barcelona, the only properties that can be advertised on online platforms in Barcelona are registered businesses, registered accommodation, and they have to use their registration number. That registration number is then checked automatically against the database. And if they're not registered, they can't market the property. So these days with technology, that's quite a simple thing. And I suppose a similar thing for anybody who's refreshed their or renewed their road fund. You know, you don't have to put in the insurance because it already knows against the registration number. And obviously, if there were people who dropped out or didn't pay, then your suspension of your register. So it blocks those channels. So, you know, tourist boards, online platforms, other people would not be able to go that way. And as I said, cost neutral and cover that. I already went on too long about that. So the benefits, well, for those, the new hosts, as they tend to be called, as well as businesses, is that everybody's compliant. And we had quite a discussion this morning about it does involve the compliant having to contribute towards the policing and tax, you know, payment for getting the non-compliant there, which is a frustration we get. Access to those platforms. And if it was legislation, I can tell you Airbnb and the others will say if it's a regulation or a requirement in a city or a region or a place, they'll abide by it, you know, because they've got systems to do it. But if it isn't, it isn't. I think there's a lot of peer-to-peer support, which is why we're delighted to work with the associations and encourage people to join associations so they can talk to fellow people about it, because it's a bit daunting otherwise. And maybe even go and visit them and see where they've done things, and peer-to-peer help. And that robust compliance. So there is funding to actually make sure that when we do get complaints that aren't exactly life-threatening, people can go out, or if people are not registered, they can go out. And that whole thing around webinars and workshops and things, but at the end of the day, the level playing field for all those involved. Just checking. I think it would help to manage over tourism. Last year, there were a lot that only did ad hoc letting in July and August. If they can do it correctly and regularly, no problem. That's competition. But a lot of people, I think, jumped on not realizing it. And that did cause some over issues. You know, it might well assist in the residential let, because people might think, actually, I'll go down the residential route. Those are ifs and buts I get. It will help through education, but make sure people do it through education and they know what they're doing rather than just doing it. And it would help engage on lots of other things. If we'd had this register when COVID was around and all those changing rules, you could have got to everybody on it and actually kept everybody informed and invited them to stuff and everything else. But likewise, we know we've got to do stuff on things like net zero and other activities where you can at least keep people informed that way. And I think, not being funny, Cornwall should be leading the way. We're a leading destination. We should be doing this. But I tell you, Cumbria, Devon, Isle of Wight, other people are also very interested. Oh, thank you. Sorry, Mike's on there. So as I said, that data I won't go on about, but it does come into some of it. Also, the compliance with waste management, because obviously everybody else who's registered as businesses do. I sort of covered the last bit. And the last one is about events. Again, if we can just keep people informed of what events are going on, what initiatives might be going on, almost like a newsletter, just helps engagement. Same way for associations to be able to engage with people. So that's really a lot quicker than I did this morning, I'm glad to say. But again, going back to, before we open up with questions, it is not about any new regulations. It's about an extra requirement to register. The way it would work, as I said, is just going through again, is literally like going online, putting the stuff in. You would have to tick what facilities you have, because obviously if you've got a hot tub or other things, that comes up, and a gas boiler, for instance, gas heating, because that then flicks up where public protection could send out the information about gas safety checks, Legionella and the regulations on that, and inviting, saying there's a monthly or bi-monthly webinar on these topics on these times. So it is about a lot more about that education, but obviously it's also about making sure that people are compliant. So with that, I will stop. We'll open it up for questions. It's not that you're going to hear an echo. We made a mistake this morning. People asked a question in the room. I answered it. The people online didn't know what the question was. So, so today, if somebody asks a question, Mike will repeat it or type it in. So it's not that we're being silly, but we suddenly realised they're having to guess the question this morning because it's the first time we use this hybrid model. Yeah, first time in learning lessons. So open house.
Yeah, just a question. I think you covered it. I just want to check my assumptions right. I was just wondering what's stopping someone like Airbnb or Vrbo creating their own registration scheme. Like, basically, how strong is the moat that you're creating? What's stopping people that aren't registered from just going onto other platforms or advertising elsewhere?
The OTAs would go along with it. They wouldn't want to set up their own one. And as I said, their whole systems are, and I speak to them, like quite pleasant people. And as they say, if it's a requirement, we'll abide by it and we'll stick to it. But when you do 142 countries and hundreds, thousands of regions and cities, they'll just say, you tell us, we can do the software. What we did talk this morning about, which is fair comment about Google and some other things, of if you did do it, how could you get around it? Being cynical. Two things that came up from that was one, obviously the main big channels are the ones that most people use. Anybody else coming up with a channel would have the same requirements of needing the registration number. So if you look at things like the Visit Cornwall website as one, we'd have to have it of, when you come up on a members to do anything, it'd be name, telephone number, email address, registration number. The other one is somebody was doing it, we would probably do a thing with the Cornwall Council comms to say, if you think somebody's doing it that isn't registered, hate to say this, rat on them. Like in COVID time, it was, if you think somebody's doing something, but there would always be a way around the margins, but hopefully it would get through 95% of it. If somebody wrote to Bolton Band Members Club and said, I've got a cottage, if any of your members do it, give me a ring. You're never going to catch that. So that's when it comes to, hang on, somebody's renting something and we're not sure they're doing it right. Then the first thing that public protection would do is look at the register. So that's the way we see around that. Yes, sir.
So why rather than understand that this decision to scheme will be made by the council?
The
Services, just a box that makes sense.
Yeah.
Question is, has Cornwall Council already decided to go ahead with it?
All right, so just as Cornwall Council already started, no. They've put it in the devolution deal, and I'll be double checking that it is in there. Only had literally as a one-liner. They haven't actually, we've worked with public protection on it, the officers, the technical people. They see it very important for the data and the housing stuff to know what's going on. The detail they haven't got into. That's why I think it's important that we work with them to make it proportionate and still effective, that it doesn't become so light that it's meaningless, or equally it doesn't become so burdensome and expensive that they've over-engineered it. I'll go to the lady first and then questions coming in. All right, sorry.
I was just wondering, you said about Airbnb, I mean, trying to do something which looks a great idea before we get to do something.
Yeah.
Would Airbnb, surely, obviously, would they, I'm just thinking, obviously, they can come along and say.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to, tell the Airbnb just call them? How's that going to work? Surely they're not going to,
Yeah.
apply with registration unless it's the whole of England, isn't it? Because obviously they're
Yeah.
a huge organisation.
They-
And they're not,
no.
they will possibly use some of the people advertising on their platform.
Yeah.
because they have a lot of on-site and they don't know.
Copy that one. Yeah. Well, if Devon come along at the same time, it'd be relatively easy because it would be a postcode match. So the postcode would know the location. That's then a requirement. If Devon didn't, it would still work for the vast majority of Cornwall, but you might have the odd situation. Yeah. Well, talking to some of them, it's how they do the registration in other countries. It's if it's a whole country one, but in places like Italy, down to towns to do it in regions.
So you could do it in Cornwall, just Cornwall.
Yeah. It would have to be done on postcodes. So it would match a postcode to say that's in Cornwall, therefore it triggers it. Yeah. Yeah. No, but it was a good question because it was one that came up the other day, and us, so I thought, yeah, you're right. And somebody said database wise, that's easy. Obviously, I don't know if anybody would fiddle it by saying I'm now in a PL1 area when they're actually in a TR26 area, but that wouldn't really help them with much business, would it? So no, sorry, ignore that one. I was just, my criminal mind of how do you get around it, put in a different postcode, but you'd end up staying in Plymouth when you really wanted St Ives. So it wouldn't be a good ploy to do. Yes, sorry.
So just to be clear, who's running the scheme? You or Cornwall Council?
It would be Cornwall Council,
Right.
because they are the public protection body.
Okay, so run the figures. You've got 20,000 properties in Cornwall.
Yeah,
Paying £200 a year. That's £4 million.
I know. It would not be that much, and I'll explain why in a minute.
Okay, so how much would it be?
That's why it's got to be open book and calculated at the right price. So if you take all those things, lots of them would be in the hands of agencies. There'd be hands of businesses that have multiple properties. So it would come down. The 15,000 is probably the key figure. That probably is. So some of those would be effective businesses. Yeah.
But then the other thing is, I've also got entity health as well.
Yeah.
And HMOs.
Yeah.
When the HMO licensing first came, it started at £250 a
Yeah.
year. It's now £1,500 a year.
Yeah.
What's stopping this has been a cash cow.
The Cornwall Council.
to lean on. I mean, there's such a narrative against
Yeah.
greedy holiday homeowners.
Yeah.
It's like, we need to raise the money. Obviously, those guys, those will complain.
I think that's a very serious threat to mitigate and manage out. So part of the reason of us coming up, collectively us, is to insist that it does come in as an open book with justifiable expense, and it's not a revenue stream for anything other than what is required to do this. Because you're absolutely right.
How does that get built in there?
That's where you've got to get the MPs and everybody else to build into that. I do agree it's a threat.
Yeah.
But I think probably it's a threat. I think sooner or later this will come anyway, probably nationally, and then you're in the danger of the anyway, whatever the initials are, I can never get it right. Homes of multiple occupancy in it. So I think I can say it wouldn't, but I think actually we're better off getting in at the bottom with this than having it imposed and not being involved at all.
Yeah, well, there's, overall roughly support that idea, but
Yeah.
it needs to be made sure it's not
Yeah.
a cash cow.
And I think the other one that came out this morning, which was quite an interesting one, which is probably going to spring on things that we would have to have a look at the options is, is it the fact that actually the amount is judged on how long the business has been operated? So if there's a new business and there is more of a charge because they probably need more support, we'll just have to look at making sure, as I said, that how is the optimum level. And it's the same with somebody like, some of the sorry, I'll be there in a minute. One of the agencies came forward who was very well professionally run with ISO systems and, whatever's systems. And, that would be a different kettle of fish anyway, because you could do a systems check on them, not individual properties. What we've got to get right is, that came out very strongly this morning, is you don't want the compliant paying for everything to be doing for the non-compliant. You've got to get that balance right. Obviously, you always do pay a bit like, not being funny. I put my money into the police, but I'm quite happy they don't have to arrest me. So we just got to get, and that's a big area to look at in the working groups, of how you get that right, and also how you get some agreements in that it is a ring-fenced pot. Sorry, lady. I'll be back to you in a minute if I can do that, lady.
How robust is the registration scheme going to be? We all know the number of regulations that we all need to comply with, when a lot of people don't. So will the registration process take people through, have you got this, have you got that, you don't have that evidence, just how far is it going to now to complete?
Yeah. I think there'll be two parts. It would be, we're still working on this. As I said, it could be as simple as only 2 bits of documentation, but you've got to tick what you've got. And then the recipient will then receive all the regulations they've got to abide by and invitations. And the conversation this morning is, some of this would be then a phone call maybe to those people from public protection to talk to them, and then make a bit of an assessment if there's a bit more work needed. Yeah, especially if they didn't actually fill too much in or they hadn't come back. So the idea, we'd have to get it right, but, they would have to get it right. But it's what they do already in terms of their risk assessment of stuff, of providers.
It can be done during the registration quite easily. A 1-bedroom Airbnb or 1-bedroom self-catering property is not going to need to comply with everything under the health and safety legislation or licensing or things like that. And we're assuming that building control and stuff like that, that will actually have to be part of it, I think, because if you haven't got building control and your house isn't fit for purpose, then you shouldn't be getting a registration anyway.
So will applicants be required to produce evidence of
Yeah, the evidence, what we're trying to do is keep the evidence that the registration will actually require down to a minimum, but cover everything that particular business is actually operating under.
So the way it's envisaged at the moment, that's a very valid point, like we just said, is if somebody registers and they've ticked that they've got gas heating and they've got hot tub or whatever, that would trigger the response going back. If you've got a gas certificate, where's your gas safety certificate? Where's your other one? Or at least where, you're going to have that ready for inspection if somebody calls. So it's more of a trigger, because I think part of the challenge at the moment with the new platforms, with everything, is somehow people think that the existing rules don't apply. I think some of the people in there, not having a go because it's innocent, is it's different. It's like the old question, would you break this rule if you thought you'd be caught, or would you break this rule if you knew you wouldn't get caught? And it's a sort of grey area where people go, hang on a minute, they know now about me. They've emailed me now about these things. I better do it. And there will always be a minority that go, I'm going to ignore it. But I think for most people, I go, I didn't realize this is what I had to do. So that's the trick. And that's where the education and advice comes in as well. So there will be webinars, concept is there will be webinars, there will be there. Associations might be running awareness things. So there's sort of, it's education, advice, support, but also enforcement if people aren't picking up on the first stages. There's a lady here that I'll be back to that lady there, which I'm ignoring. So I'll go to you next.
My question to some extent, but just to clarify,
Sorry,
as
get
an
those then.
agency with hundreds of
Yeah.
properties across Cornwall, is it the case that as it's the agencies that will have to comply? So i.e. we have to prove good practice, or does it have a 800,
Yeah.
pay £50 for every property?
Yeah.
Allowing recovering some of that from the owner?
I haven't got the definitive answer on that. That's why we want to work with the agencies, because there are agencies are different.
Yeah.
There's a couple of national agencies now where we have most of the complaints. We don't only have one complaint about a local agency. A lot of complaints about two national agencies. So I think what we want to work with you to say, and it would almost be, the way this would be done normally in other things, it'd be a systems check on the agency.
Yeah.
And then it'd be a requirement for you to upload it. But yeah, you're doing all of this, so we don't have to, or the council don't have to. But if somebody's just opened up an agency, takes on any old properties and haven't got any systems, no. That's why it's got to be something built in to actually assess the agency first.
But you've got no idea really at this stage what that cost might be for an agency?
No, that's where
that do comply?
that's where it comes down. It could be lower, because it would be a bad thing to encourage some people to go that way rather than marketing direct. That's where we want to involve you in building up these costs from the bottom, because theoretically there's more than enough money there at that sort of price. So that's where we want to work.
So it would be an agency
Yeah,
registration.
yeah. It would be an agency registration, then the requirement would be probably a sample, this is me surmising, go in, look at your systems, look what you record. And I know, Nicola used to work for an agency, they got it all on their system.
Yeah.
And then probably a couple of sample checks of places, and then go, your systems are robust and we've checked it. A bit like any audit system.
Yeah.
That's fine then, and then,
A bit like the QAA.
yeah. And it would be the same, not being funny. I know it's on if you've got a major holiday park with 500 units,
Yeah.
it's almost the same principle there,
Yeah.
because they should have a system, but you've still got to prove your system is there and it's robust before just not being allowed to tick a box. So there's this lady here I've been rude about. Yeah.
Just wonder what work will be done around what is tourism, because if you ask anyone in accommodation,
Yeah.
whether they're in a restaurant or a cafe, they might have different views of tourism. And I'd be interested in how it will feed in a practical sense into planning around car parking, access to hospitals, healthcare.
Yeah.
We know that there's some difficulty with that. But also how in the long run, it
Got
will
this one
be
down.
monitored and measured as an effective outcome of the
Yeah.
scheme. Because if there's no way of monitoring and measuring that, it will in
Yeah.
effect become a cash generating
Yeah.
scheme. So it's just a thought for future.
No, it's a very valid point. I think the first thing is to get that first bout of comprehensive data of where we are.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might find it's actually an over exaggeration in parts of Cornwall, because part of it is distribution. And when people talk about how busy it was last year, I mean, partly that was, a significant jump up in Airbnb, more in Airbnb occupancy actually than absolute numbers, but even things like the 56-day camping. So it created more volume. I'll be interested to see how, already this is a quieter May than we would normally have, isn't it? So, that might not be so much the issue, but I hope it would help with by having that data is stopping the certain media, Cornwall Live in particular, stirring the pot all the time and bigging up because we'd have the data, because you do get a lot of statements made, and I do wonder if those statements are absolutely bloody true. And it's really stirring the pot. So part of that is an issue around that. But as you say, if you do realise that there's been a lot more units coming up around Bude or down on the Lizard, and what's the Helston requirement for stuff around certain times. So there's a gentleman over there.
So we're talking about registration, which I've had conversations with Alistair past.
Yeah.
But then I think on Monday there was a whole Cornwall.
Yeah.
And there was comments out there where the word was licensing.
Yeah.
So is there do you think this might lead into licensing, which would then potentially, you mentioned
Yeah.
Barcelona.
Yeah. They have got it.
In a minute.
Yeah. This is not connected to licensing. I'll say that. It obviously could be a stepping. Yeah. Yeah. I think the issue to my mind is let's get the data first before they suddenly start bringing in a licensing scheme without the data.
So what are we doing about it?
About the licensing bit.
Yeah.
Licensing would need primary legislation. That's a big process. And I'm not sure the current government would be interested in going down a licensing. What might go down a different way is planning permission, but again, that would still need primary legislation. So I think that's a totally different consultation.
Yeah, so at the moment, I think that what they're basing on is devolution.
Yeah.
So if that gets awarded, will they then be able to go down the planning application route?
They would not without getting government to do primary legislation to do it, or big changes in the Planning Act. I'm not, so I've got to actually say, yes, it could be a staple along there, but it might be the right way to go this rather than the wrong way. There's a danger if you just brought in a licensing or planning restriction, it's based on no requirement at all.
Are we speaking to the right people at Cornwall Council then?
Yes, we are. I think if I'm, well, I always am too loose. I think some of it is nice political statements to make, that it plays well in the audience, as opposed to practicalities of the political colour of the council and the government. I think the other thing we really need to know, though, to be quite honest, I should have said that first, is what we've got being stirred up is this thing against second homes, rather than actually about people doing holiday lets and businesses. And then, because in a way, the second home bit is the smallest part of it. All these people who don't do it, if somebody's got a property and they're using it, letting it through an agent for 25, 30 weeks of the year, that's an economic driver. So that's the other bit about getting the data. So I can't give you 100% assurance because I'm not in a position to do it. All I know is bringing in those things is a lot more problematic than this. But there is a danger, like we quoted this morning. One of the worries of some of this is that there's almost suddenly political action and knee-jerk reaction. It's the wrong thing to do, like the Dangerous Dogs Act, that somebody comes in something quickly. So we're trying to get the right balance. And also, if you did, and this is me speculating now completely, is what you wouldn't want is that to be brought in right across Cornwall. Somebody saying, "Oh, you need licensing right across Cornwall," because there will be parts of South East Cornwall, other places. So actually, we're okay. So that's where it's a far bigger debate.
Yeah, okay. So is there anything we can do before the devolution decision is made to change the council's mind? I will, in a different meeting to do with something completely odd about space tomorrow, but there are 5 MPs there, the leader and the chief executive, so I will point out clearly is that really in the Devo deal or is it the registration? Because I don't think the second bit is deliverable in the devolution deal. The only time it could be, probably be if we had to have a mayor. Because that's the next level to before you get more powers. Sorry, I think that's right. I'm over there, just sorry.
The level playing field part of this is actually really important and really attractive. But to my mind, we're not just competing within Cornwall, we're competing within the UK. So in that context, it will explain why you think it's important all of these, rather than putting our efforts into trying to drive a national scheme.
We've been trying to drive a national scheme for 8 years, and I think the only thing I think an advantage is it's just past history, and I might be wrong. Government, if they do want to do something, normally look for pilot areas. So if it was brought in somewhere else, we might have to put up with whatever else somebody comes up with. But I do take that's a very valid point. What I would hope is if we brought it in, we could actually use it as a positive advantage that Cornwall is operating on a safe and legal basis. So, if somebody doesn't want to be, we'd have to make that clear that this is really about, we care about the customer. I had on this announcement, I had the Daily Express phone up and said, well, let's put this off. I went, what do you mean? The fact that the industry wants to look after its guests and keep them safe, why should that put anybody off? You should be asking why other places aren't asking for it as well. Which I know is a bit of a smart ass reply, but the journalist did say, oh, it's a valid point. That was quite a bit of discussion this morning. I mean, firstly, the platforms themselves, because obviously somebody goes to do it and they say you're not registered, go back and register. Same with people like us and Visit Britain and Visit England and others. The other one I'd have to say would be an information one. Well, the first thing is you would put information in, talking to this, in things like the council tax bill when you receive it and the business one. So, if you are letting your place out, you must be registered. so that people cannot do the I didn't know. And the other one, I suppose, would be if it wasn't really working, would be if you think somebody in your area is renting out is not registered, drop an email to Public Protection at Cornwall Gov, like they did in the COVID period, and then Cornwall Council could then quickly check the register.
Not gonna necessarily know, some people don't use some of the platforms,
Yeah.
they use very local, internet,
Yeah,
advertising, very locally.
I think, yeah.
When you said about registering, you could take that out and tick boxes.
Yeah.
Are you going to actually really ensure that those people do have those, you know, the mindful things that need to be done, I should expect them.
Yeah.
You know, the PAT testing,
Yeah.
the ICR, all those tests, it's quite to say.
Yeah.
But surely those certificates should be in file.
Yeah.
Audit, the holiday company, the platform, the council,
Yeah.
whoever has registration, so that we do have all that documentation and in place.
I think that's a very valid, yes.
What I am aware of, you know, some bigger holiday companies. And
Yeah.
the owner really thinking, well, you know, they're doing everything, and not actually having all these things in place. I am aware of that. It has happened, is it, you know, although there was a big holiday company that, you know, it is written into the holiday company.
Yeah.
The actual owner is not thinking.
Wanted to do it.
Those things, but it's actually proven.
Yeah.
You know, that we do have those certificates and documents coming out on an annual basis, wherever it is required.
I think,
You have a legal, sorry.
yeah. I suppose it's,
You
yeah.
have- sorry, you have a legal requirement with the health and safety regulations to actually nominate a person, and that person has to be nominated. So if you're going into a big company and saying, where's your nominated person, which is the case in some industries where nominated people have now been ended up in court, charged with offences they might or might not have committed, then the bigger companies are going to shy away from it very, very fast. And the onus will come back on the fact that if you let somebody through your door as an owner of that property, you have a legal requirement to look after their safety and well-being.
So I think
And that is written in UK law.
how do you make it happen?
Well, part of the registration, if you expand what we're doing with
Yeah.
documentation, if you need to actually go down that road and actually say under the health and safety regulations, you need to nominate a person, and that person has to sign a document which states that they are fully responsible and fully aware of the situation. If that goes on record and something happens, that person then will end up in court, guaranteed.
But I think that, yeah.
Well, the documentation is very easy if we give you a template.
So I think the way I see it could envisage, and that's why we're going to ask people to be involved in this as it rolls out to hone it, the proposition. It could be quite right. We need to relook at it. Things like gas safety is so important. It should actually be on there, and other things aren't. So it might be 2 or 3 more documents to make it robust at the start. I think the other one with, and I think, you know, another thing that's just said is, you know, you almost need that thing before you sign your life away, that you do realize you are now the nominated person who is legally responsible, blah, blah, blah. So that people actually do get a bit of a shock that it's not a matter of ticking a box. So I think those are very valid points of, like Bruce just said, of adding that in, working out if there's a couple more things that should be on that first initial list. And I think the other one, as I said, is talking to public protection. Part of this would be phone calls to people, particularly if they're a new one, to say, oh, I've seen you tick this. What have you actually got? Yeah. Yeah. Just going through that sample. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll put out enough data into the public domain that will actually, anybody coming.
Yeah,
This is,
I know,
Yeah.
it's all to do with numbers.
And I think that-
and the more
sorry.
data we get
Yeah.
out to people in the near future, the better it's going to be.
I mean, there's a cost issue, comes back to the cost issue, get it right. You know, one idea would be, which would add to the cost a bit, is if you do register, then you actually get sent, you know, information that is quite pertinent with a letter. And I think some of that for the first wave would probably be needed. So that actually, you know, you cannot dodge it. Now that doesn't add that much because it's a couple of quid. But, you know, emails, I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, I didn't get the email, it went into junk, you know, but it's just a lot of it is just making people aware of what they should already be doing. And also Bruce's point, and how they are personally accountable. And, yeah. 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 Well, that as yeah. 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 Okay with that one? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just ask one question? Sir?
It is compulsory, yeah. Yeah.
I just do it for their own personal Facebook and things. So how's, you know, they are, how are we going to
I think you will never get everybody, or you could never get everybody. I think your point there about that sort of agency would be then it would kick back to each individual property owner to provide it because the agency isn't doing it. And equally, I think what would have to be careful of, not just, no disrespect to you guys, that not only does Cornwall Council not milk it, but an agency doesn't milk it, you know, so that's not being rude. But, you know, well, no, because you could register if they're not doing what you've just said that other agencies do, then yeah. But the idea is you could register your property, and then you've just said that's my registration number. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
actually, like I say, it's maybe the bigger national global ones that operate in Cornwall that would be harder to combat because we're
Yeah.
already visible. Yeah,
And
it's quite hard to hide if you're
yeah.
local.
So I'll take that lady first. Then. Yeah.
I'm going to say, a small
Yeah. Yeah.
And nationals will used to inspect the properties every 12 months to the dot, and they don't do that anymore because they rely on self-assessment. It's
Yeah.
down to the owner to fill in the document. But ultimately, the owner is responsible for anything that goes wrong within that property,
Yeah.
not the agency.
Yeah.
So slowly and slowly, the owner should be the person that is registering for the property. Yeah. And the responsibility lies wholly with them.
Yep. So,
it's gone out of date. You've done your bit, you've asked them, told them what they need to do to be compliant. If they miss it, refuse it, whatever, they are responsible for you as well.
Thank you for that. That's why one of the things after this is working groups, and that's working with the agencies to get this right. That's what I mean by doing it. There's quite a few hands up now, but if I go to, and then I'll work my way forward.
I'd like to just bring something forward as an individual. I'm not an agency, I'm an individual, but I'm also running a company. I had a situation where I had a holiday lets and long-term residential lets. I think as long as it's clear, both for long-term letting and for holiday letting, as long as the legislation is clear what we need to provide, the owner should be on the owner.
Okay.
At the end of the day, what you talked about with last owner, yes, I'm fully aware, I might have the rule, and I go into somewhere, there's a little certificate back to the door, you know, I don't pay much attention to it, but I'm used to seeing it. I would suggest that there's something, education comes as part of this to our visitors and our holiday makers and everything else, that we have that type of system where people become that our clients and the people that are trying to make sure that what they're booking is legal and responsible and following the rules, basically.
This is all covered on the website, under our GUA, that's it, actually, yes, everything that you need to
No, no, let's take that lady first.
And that's, you know,
But we're not telling people that when they visit, are we?
yes,
It's a guess. So we're not actually then showing the proof that we're actually complying with this. Yeah, yeah, but I think again.
Are there any questions coming in? Yeah, I've got a few. Right. I'll do these two then questions.
Yeah.
then that puts a thought process in the mind of, is this a fake document or not?
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
yes, you don't want to invite the price of the teachership of, because that's what it's relatively known for. Yeah. And people have got their eyes up there for 6 weeks, living in a garden shed,
Yeah.
and no compliance in place. And we've taken a lot of money as they did last year.
Yeah.
And we're waiting for something to happen.
Well, I was going to say that's, I mean, public protection say they would hate it to happen, but if a family got killed or something, then there'd be legislation come hurtling in all the wrong way. There's 2 more people, then we'll go on to some online questions. Sorry, you've been very patient.
I've got 5 cottages.
Yeah.
I do let through an agency, but I also let privately.
Yeah.
But my agent allows us to do both. My agent came to your morning session.
Yeah.
I'm in there involved. And I was thinking about what Lady said, as an agent, I was just trying to work that through my head and I think what these guys are saying, and I think it's the property is registered, it's going to the owner, and because what I was thinking,
Good point.
would I end up being penalised? Would my agents end up
Think.
taking my allowances and things like that? Because would I end up having to double register?
Yeah.
So actually, yes, I think it should be a property.
Yeah. That's where we're going to then work out how's the efficient way of doing that.
Because I already talked to them about the dealing
Yeah.
criteria. And your agent should be taking it face value. They were, yeah. Not just saying
Yeah.
download it and send them all out. They don't have insurance.
Mm.
And insurance, they don't have a thing. So annually, my agent, I have to, prove that, they ask, don't, but they're not full on, was the back agent. But it's a full-time job for a small agent. Oh, yeah.
Not one full-time job.
Okay, we've got one question of, oh, sorry.
None of them knew of this, and it wasn't a visit farm.
Yeah.
I may not have known. So how's it going to be broadcast?
Well, we did try to get it out in the press and the media, so we did do quite a bit on that. And to be quite honest, this is step 2 of a process we've been on. It's not the end process. It's not a cooked deal, and we'd have to go a lot more. Hence why broadening it out to some people, to broaden it out again, to get the feedback, to feed it up that way. So it's not. Don't get me wrong. This is not right. Well, we're finishing now. Consultations happened. This is what it is. Done deal to Cornwall Council. What do you think? It's got to be an ongoing process. But the idea of starting a conversation now is if this is coming one way or another, we want to have those things. That debate we've just had is critical. And then how do you do that with the agency? And is there a way, because you're quite right about who's responsible. It could go live as early as next April, but probably it might be later than that. To be quite honest, it shouldn't go live until it's right, because that goes back to proportionate and effective.
Not the agencies, but I think you then, that has the effect on the fees that charge, so the fees that you charge to each property and not to the agencies.
Yeah.
So I think that.
I suppose the difference, yeah. Yeah. So gentlemen, everyone's been very patient. So.
Michael, there was more of a comment, but just echoing what everyone else has said about the owners being on the owners. You've mentioned a couple of times the lessons from Barcelona.
Yeah.
When they first brought in registration, there was an influx of third parties that were dealing with the registration, which just created the Wild West where they were doing it for fee. Corners, loads of properties were not to standard because they were all being managed through these agents. A lot of properties in Barcelona were owned by like private equity funds and hedge funds in the US, so they couldn't do it themselves. And it just caused real problems in the first kind of 6 months. So if we, taking lessons from someone like Barcelona, it seems like the owners should really be on the owners.
Yeah. And I think then it's like, was the agent is then a role of actually advisor and supporter of making it more easy for the owner, but the owner's got to do it. It's a bit, yeah. Because I suppose legally that's the case. We're going to take some questions online, and I'll be straight back to you in a minute because the people online have been very patient.
Okay, first two, just quick recap where the ones that the thing froze and missed out. Could you just confirm the time scale, which you have mentioned?
Yeah.
Next spring.
It'll be what it means, spring at the earliest, but it might well be later.
And will this apply to all OTAs, or will this be to selected ones like Airbnb and Booking.com?
It applies to all businesses and therefore all the OTAs.
Right. Properties with more than 6 guests are already regulated under the fire regs with the associated costs. Will this be another cost for the accommodations as above? So why are you aiming all of this for accommodation providers instead of pinpointing down for ones which have 6 guests and under?
I'm afraid the 6-bed rule doesn't apply anymore. You've got to have a fire risk assessment regardless of how many people you have. That used to be a rule. Under 6 beds, you didn't have to do it, so you could kill 6 people.
That's all we've got.
But not more than that.
That's all we have for now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was the wrong thing to say. Fireman's son, I'm afraid. So, I mean, not being funny. I mean, I said this morning. My father was a fire officer, and back in the 70s, he was telling me. I mean, he's gone now. But this is nothing new really. Back in the 70s and 80s, when Cornwall was rammed again, was on the way into Falmouth or any town, people would bung up a sign saying B&B and campsite. What the fire brigade used to do is go around knocking on doors, put a leaflet in saying we're coming to do an inspection next week. And he said the following week, half the signs were down and half the people had gone back to what they were doing. Unfortunately, now with the platforms, you can't do that anymore because you don't know where they are. So it's almost the digital part of this is almost a digital thing of you can do it, but you've got to do it right. And you are on the radar. So, but there's.
I think you just by saying you don't know where they are. Cornwall Council trying to do the commercial waste. And I think there are a lot of properties that are being missed because annexes that are attached to many properties, council tax is being paid, however. You still have to be part of that, there is still payment to still commercial waste. So the Cornwall Council can't catch up with everybody that's doing it now with relation to just commercial waste. How are they going to catch up with everybody with properties?
I think the main thing is if you've got to have a registration number to go there. That register is also available to say commercial waste. Sorry. The fact that the principle is to distribute your product with an agent or an OTA or tourist board or anybody else, you'd have to use your registration number to prove you were registered. That register of all the accommodation would also be known by the council's waste department.
So you're saying, I'm saying now, there are properties that are registered for commercial.
Yeah.
Some of those maybe that just haven't been contacted.
Yeah.
Well, this is,
Or it could be that it's an annex to the main property that's paying council tax, we don't seem to have to. So where I'm from, I can see lots of waste being put out, it's not labelled, it's not commercial, it's not, stamped up, so some are, some aren't, so the council can't, get that across the board, how are we going to do this?
well, this is one reason why we want the data out there. This is why we want the registration scheme, because everybody will come under the registration scheme. And as soon as you apply, and you will, by law, you would be required to apply if you want to have accommodation.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
With this. We will put this out.
If somebody's not bothering to comply on commercial ways, they're probably not going to comply on registration.
Yeah, but at the moment they could go on an online platform, and the provided online platform isn't telling them about commercial waste. This is to get on that platform, they'd have to register, then they would be automatically on that list. Obviously, there are people that might say, I'm going to avoid the OTAs, I'm going to avoid the tourist board, I'm going to do that. That's a rocky road to try to get customers. And there's not every road we could block off if you're going down the wrong way. Because most of the people who've jumped on are because of the very effective online platforms. So if you're not able to do those, it's a lot harder to get yes, you could put an advert in the Birmingham Post or the Exchange of Mark when we had somewhere. But that's a lot stonier way of trying to get customers and quickly bung it on a platform. So there's a lady.
Once you've registered, so if you don't register, you won't be able to advertise on the online platform until the
Yeah.
So if you haven't registered, you can't advertise. You can't go on
Yeah.
Airbnb, for example. Once you have registered and you've got your then that will trigger all the other means that you pay with refuge collection.
Yep.
You can't then call the council, collect rubbish.
Yeah.
So it's all part of
Yeah.
in 5 and 10 years
Yeah.
time, everything works its way through the system and everybody's really
Yeah. And it's just a trigger point that, this is, I even had an MP who said, well, Airbnb doesn't apply. I did sort of point that out, that was wrong. But, there are these, not even myths and legends, just really quite heartfelt beliefs that somehow you can do it. Doesn't matter about the rules because they don't apply, because it's an online platform. I think hopefully we're getting some of that message across, but then there's a bit about, I probably about 10 years ago, I was at the Royal Cornwall show when Airbnb were there. So I took off me gilet and went up and went, here boy. I said, this bloody Airbnb bit, can I put my cottage on there? And he was, yes. And he was quite clever. And I said, yeah, but those plonkers at the tourist board and those buggers at the council always keep wanting me to do things. Do I have to do any of that with you? And he went, well, no, as long as you're compliant, you don't have to do any of that. And he was very cleverly saying, as long as you're compliant. So I turned up 10 minutes later wearing my gilet, going, my brother was here a while ago. And he said, but I always said compliant. So it's that sort of thing of selective hearing. Now, I think they've got to be honest, fair. They've got better than that because they're in their recruitment phase at that stage. But I think from the other side, it is this thing about, well, nobody really knows it. Right? I've heard you're supposed to, but I'm only going to do it for a few weeks. And I know somebody else who's doing it, and nobody's telling them wrong. I had this with my niece the other day, and her fella said, here, somebody's down the road at Paul's Tower, 500 quid a week in the garage. I'm going to convert the garage. So we had a conversation. Yeah. 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 It is. Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we've only got 4 weeks booked this year. And I'm like, oh,
yeah. And that is really what this is about at the end of the day is, and if you are operating, oh, sorry, I didn't realize the pen was up. So if you are operating and you've got registered, you've got sent everything, then there has got to be the enforcement and the fines and everything else, because you are ignoring it. You can't claim ignorance. You have purposely ignored the stuff you've been sent, and that includes not reading it. Sorry, you have been very patient. All right.
I read somewhere that this registration scheme is applying to people that left within 70 days.
No, that's the Welsh system on to do with being a business. We reckon, well, our thing is if you let one day, you do it, because this is a bit like I've always said, if I drive my car for 1 hour once a year, I've got to have insurance, I've got to have an MOT. So we say this 1 day, 1 night. Obviously you can do a day, one could sleep, I suppose, but 1 night's sleep, anybody, you've got to be registered. The Welsh system is to claim business rates. Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose my question to you is, what else can we be doing as tourism businesses? I don't think this is enough to solve the housing crisis.
I think that's a broader question. I think this is the point we start at when we start talking about licensing planning. That gets very complicated and takes a heck of a lot of work. I think on that basis, there's some interesting ideas coming forward about how you do housing developments generally. So there's going slightly off the tangent. There's a guy who actually owns holiday parks who was actually looking at a new style residential park. So take away your brains of residential parks, or in America, trailer trash, of making eco homes, because a holiday park is a footprint that's already got development on. And that would be coming in at £150,000 to purchase, because there'd be small units. So I think in some regards, this is part of it. We also need, coming back from that conference on Monday, you also need to look at actually supply issues and where you can do it. So I think it is part of it. But the biggest thing it would give is that real information to do proper neighbourhood planning. Yeah. 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 Sorry, there's a gent there, and then I'll come to you, madam.
I've been approached a second homeowner to rent their property out. I've been catched because they rented their cousins, their friends. You were saying 1 day rental.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're never going to catch them second homeowners.
No, but you can get the Cornwall Live to make sure everybody goes around ratting on them. Sorry, slightly flippant, but you could say, like, if you think that somebody is renting out, just drop an email to, like they did in COVID, to Cornwall Protection, they'll check the register. And then that might be a phone call to say, are you letting out?
The system will crash because there's so many.
That's true. Yeah, maybe not Cornwall Live. I know it's difficult and there'll always be those edges around, but I think it's not ratting, it's actually informing. It's the wrong word to use. It is actually about, yeah, it's about saying that, this is about protecting guests. What you won't be able to do, because I'll be honest, is if somebody's well connected and got a second home in Cornwall, only rents out to all their mates and not use any platforms. That's where you do need people to say that is being rented out, and the council do need to have a look to see if it is registered. Yes.
I think it's really a positive step.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I own holiday cottages, I also have residential cottages, and it's a family-run business, and I have got quite a few. And I'm actually really looking forward to having, and I think everyone's voiced it today, having the cottages that aren't running correctly. I don't mind competition. I don't mind positive competition. But what I don't like is people, when I'm trying to sell a weekend in Zoom and someone, I'm using the phrase, I'm saying Sandiland, I'm so sorry someone is in Sandiland, but somebody did live on Sandiland that was selling their 4-bed house for like half the price of what I was. Now I'm sitting there, they're moving out, the house didn't look like a holiday for it. It's like me, I couldn't do that in my house. I'm a mum, a dad, 2 kids. There's no way. I don't think my house would be safe for holidays to come to my house. But my holiday cottages are, and I have, minimalistic, clean, tidy, all the protocols in place, safety in place, stamps, stickers, everything, you name it, it's done. And the overheads for me are huge. I also have staff that work for me, have worked for me now for 10 years, my 10th season. Whereas I'm really looking forward to this happening because I can't wait to push those out, and not in a horrible way, but in a way that will support businesses. Not only will it be safe for people coming to Cornwall and having a good holiday, I think we have too much bad press in the past few years. I don't think it's fair that we as businesses have had that to actually taking the request back and have formulas a really positive place to come, I'm looking forward to it. So really, thank you for doing this. I'm really pleased.
Okay, thank you. In my view, is like it is shape up or ship out.
Yeah.
You know, come up to it or get out. You know, in a nice way. And that's why I said the education, everything else should be there. But many years ago, I'll take the questions in a minute. At Southwest Tourism, when redundancies were popular in outside, we did a program called Fresh Start, which was for people who have got redundancies, sell a house and buy a B&B down in the Southwest. And they had to get, well, they didn't have to. The estate agents were very good then, and particularly the banks. They pushed people on the program. At the end of the day, only 33%, it was always 30 to 40% only went forward. The other ones decided it was a lot more work than they thought.
I think we're there as well, because how many people this year alone, I've had people come to me, because we do have residential lets as well, and you've got a residential, you've got a resident, and have it,
Yeah.
because I was out on that.
Yeah.
Like, and they tend to stay around for the long term.
Yeah.
Some of our tenants have been with us for like 8, 9,
Yeah.
10, 11 years. But so many people are keeping those people out.
Yeah.
It's not just to sell
Yeah.
them, it's to put them as a holiday let. And we don't need any more, like the saturation is there. So, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's also an issue where the two need to be discussed hand in hand.
Yeah, housing.
But at the end of the day, the legislation between the two needs to be leveled out in terms of how easy it is to do one compared to the other.
Yeah.
The reason that people are jumping out of long-term rentals and going into short-term rentals is definitely because they find it easier, faster money, etc. And with everything going forward with regard to heating and everything else, it seems like an easier option. So I think the two have to be discussed together as an issue for approval, because we have to manage both of them.
Yeah, thank you. We got some questions online.
Yeah, could you just clarify, you stated obviously no legislation required, but compulsory registration, will that become legally binding?
If it was enacted by Parliament, it'd be legally binding alongside every other form of registration.
Secondly, just clarify accommodation types, obviously hotels, B&Bs, etc. Will it also apply to pop-ups, tents, campsites, pods, huts, etc.?
Yes. Yeah.
And lastly, at the moment, Airbnb are currently calling on the government to bring in a nationwide registration system. Are we collaborating with them to ensure compatibility and other platforms?
Yes, I was involved with the tourism minister, other people. It was a Zoom one on the whole thing, and Airbnb and other ones are on there. So there is that discussion. But to give you an idea, that was announced last year. There was supposed to be a call for evidence in January and consultation and everything done. It's slowed up some in the gun works. The other thing I should make clear is it has already got primary legislation. It doesn't need it. It already exists. It's just the turning the key that needs to be done. Rosemary and the gent there.
There is an awful lot of ignorance there, because that question just now about 6 bedrooms.
Yeah.
I just checked, and that went out in 2005.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I went to the initial meeting at the Dinosaur Museum when Airbnb started becoming fun. There was a question, I think I might have asked a question about firing. And the fireman, the serving fireman, stood up and said, you do not need it if you only do it part-time, or you've only got 2 bedrooms. So he was in the
Yes, and as you said, 2005.
Yeah, I remember it well.
My hair was a different colour then, and there was more of it. So thank you.
With thousands of us owners,
Yeah.
we need also direct accountability to us, the risk of adding extra costs.
No, I think, yeah.
Plus, it's whoever the council is in
Look,
with.
yeah.
To bring the issue.
Do that from your local tourism association.
Yeah, no, I think the thing we're talking about is why we actually want to say work with the industry, do the industry, open book, ongoing thing. How we do that, I've just written down, we've got to work that one out, but it's not top down, if you get me. Because as I said, the other way, it will come top down and somebody will say, add on this, add on that fee, and you're back into the 200 quid goes £1,500 malarkey. So I think that's why we're having this conversation, to try to get that rather than having to respond when it comes in the other way. But your point about, you know, you would need some advisory panel that would look into it, made up of representatives from associations, others. Yeah. 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 And it's almost a scrutiny process. If there is something coming up, why is that evidence that there is a requirement to do more or charge more? Or if it's running at a surplus, why can't the reduced rates be there? That's sort of scrutiny. That's what I wrote down. Because that's what doesn't happen on other areas. You know, I'm not saying this is what we're proposing, but tell you what, at times like this, when you propose things, you're in a better position to negotiate than when it's coming the other way. Yes, sir.
The councils, it's up to the councils whether they tell them to change the use or whatever. And approval does need change of use post, right? I mean, it's for Alice, that I don't know. Within South, if we have properties, you know, detached property, residential, we have to get change of use, which costs for a whole planning application we put into a house. So is there, so that would, I mean, a lot of people are doing this illegally. From the planning point of view, they obviously haven't got change of use. Is that going to be one of the questions? Or do it change of use? Unless it's empty, no, it's not good to let start. So if people just moving out of the house or they, you know, doing whatever, most of it will be from a planning point of view that it is illegal. So is there going to be a planning question? I think there should be. That we do enforce change of use. Some councils don't know. Start with, that should be a question, but it is more important to have change of use. We'll say what I don't for a residential property, so we have a residential property and we change it up.
You don't need, yes, you need it the other way round.
No, we were told we did.
Well, we did, we went for it, we paid £500,
Oh, yeah, from what classification?
Well, it was just a residential property.
Yeah, residential is
C3,
but that's-
C, I don't know what
If you just do a holiday, then it should.
well, we were told we did, and we had to pay £500 for the whole thing.
What's the other classification?
What do you mean?
Well, you've got the classification. C.
I know it's the, I can't remember, it was but it was a residential property on site, on farm. It was a residential property paying council tax. So we checked, we checked, do we need to do it? I mean, the council was so unhelpful, but we found that, yes, you do, and we did one for it, 270 quid. No, you need a full planning application, although we weren't doing any building or anything like that. Half of the board, we're not doing.
99% certain, 77%. Regular housing certain.
We'll check that, but my understanding is that
It's here, yeah.
perversely, you can go from residential to holiday, but if it's designated for holiday, you need planning permission to go to residential.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at stuff, I've done it, I can see our life falling apart.
Yeah.
First, so I looked to try and convert from FHL to residential, and it's, the cost is prohibitive.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's a one-way valve. Yeah, yeah. To residential. That's the way I. I know.
With the case.
Well, no, Kim was with us today. She's gone that way and she had to go through the whole system and have letters from us to say we're quite comfortable with them going to residential. Yeah. Yeah. Now, come on, say what you feel.
I mean,
yeah. No.
The case here, yeah, that is quoted in the pink book. Are you listening, Rosemary?
Rosemary? Bruce is talking to
The
you.
case here that is quoted in the pink book is that to go from residential to bed and breakfast, you do not need planning permission, but you need your property to comply with current
Building regs.
building regs.
So that's bed and breakfast, we're talking about furnished holiday lets.
Yeah, there is different regulations of furnished holidays to bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
Is a furnished
We,
holiday.
I mean, we'll take that away and look at it because it's, but my understanding was there wasn't an issue. Yeah.
We saw a really good example yesterday of a converted garage that really does just provide a building regs. It's being rented out at quite a lot of money, and I tried to look at when it was available, and there were like 3 days available in August.
Yeah.
That's what frustrates me. I'm up against people who clearly, there wasn't even enough headroom, and there wasn't clear path of fire. That tip list surely needs to be building regs in some ways.
I've just added to that about you, and also that the building regs people also get access to the register.
Town and Country Planning Act, was that a reason for your change of use?
Well, if we.
Anyway, sorry.
I was just thinking, it's an opportunity as well to provide us guys a service.
Yeah.
Obviously you've got a load of data, and obviously you're going to have a computer ping things on. I just thought it was something really easy, for instance, when you upload all the snippets. Really good actually if your system, as soon as you've uploaded on a certain day, actually is getting like a 28-day notification say your gas safety.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would cost.
I've already put that in.
Yeah, you have. Yeah. No, yeah. I wish they'd do that for. I wish they'd do that for the
I
MOT.
was actually thinking
Yeah.
you could actually type
They
in
dropped it for the MOT.
Yeah.
plants. Maybe could even put that. Well, it'd be quite.
Oh,
easy.
yeah.
If I was a plumber, I'd want to know,
Yeah.
you know, it's like you've got 28 days to get, you know, you call everybody, no one's around.
No, you're right, because I think that about the MOT. I don't get a reminder on the MOT or
Yeah.
something, always around Christmas sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah. People, especially these days, you almost expect it.
Make it more sort of value for money.
Yeah.
It's very sort of,
Yeah.
like, oh, you've got to do this, but actually it'd be an incentive to do it, like actually pay such a quick, we get these things.
Yeah.
back.
And you get advice and you get triggers when things change.
Yeah.
Because the, you know, the building 22nd of, we're not on the 22nd of May yet, are we?
No, not
20,
quite.
I'm sure it was last night's thing. 22nd of May, the building, the fire regs change. Only if you've got combined properties with walls. So there's one for everybody, but that's only just come out.
Yeah.
And we've been
That's
asked,
something you can see,
Yeah.
change like that,
Yeah.
really useful.
yeah,
You can send out to everybody.
yeah. And then actually, you know, what we want to do is send it out to people and then have a webinar tied up so we can do this a bit more flexibly. And that would be the people that know about it. So that again, it's a positive rather than just telling people you got to do it and they go, oh, what the hell do I do? Yeah. And the, oh, yes. The 22nd of May, I'll look it up in a minute. There's new fire regs coming in about dividing walls or something within properties that are adjoining.
Yeah.
It came out last night, didn't
It's
it?
to do with fire breaks,
Fire breaks.
basically. It's
Yeah.
not extensive, but it's
Yeah.
where two properties join.
When are the fire regs, they've been going to be updated the last couple of years for furnished holidays? When are they coming? Do you know?
Well, that's what we're asking, which is why it suddenly came out like that. And
It's not as extensive as what
No,
people thought it was.
that seems to be it. But what we have got, yeah. What we'll do, Nicola, we can send that email that I sent around yesterday about the new fire regs. We can do that to everybody who's come to this event. Because yeah, yeah, yeah. It literally came in, I'm sure, yesterday. So, and that again is, you know, what we've got an agreement with, I'll go back now to say, well, let's have a webinar about what that really means. Because there's one thing telling people, and it's like, well, what the hell does it really mean?
I would need all the supply. There's so many properties that don't die and down on where they're all flying freeholds.
Oh, that's
So
true.
how are they gonna get around that?
That's a good one, that one.
Sure mine's on as well.
Yeah,
Martin Rose Island.
that's it, yeah. I tried to sell a house once with a flying freehold. You said to somebody outside and they do not understand it. Don't have a non-Cornish solicitor look at that. Sorry, yeah, no. Any other questions or comments? Well, there's tea and coffee at the back and we can carry on individual discussions. What will, as I said, this is an open conversation. I hope what you've seen is we're listening and scratching stuff down, and I can re-listen to this and look at it. Because we do want to try to negate mistakes. People coming down from the regulatory side, not actually talking to the people that have to actually operate it. So the idea is, I should do the next steps then, shouldn't I? So the conclusions is this has been incredibly valuable. We do need to extend the conversation, but the next steps is to look at different aspects of this, from hotels to holiday parks to agencies, to reflect on this, to say, would you be interested in being involved in a working group, which might be more virtual and Zoomy, if you get me, or even round the table about what are the issues that we need to resolve to make this, sorry to won't put it up again, proportionate but effective. So that's the next steps issue. And that's why Nick has already said it, we will circulate this, the recording, but also a thing after this back to anybody who's come and including online, say this is where we're working, would you be interested in being involved in helping to shape this? Because it'd be very good to go to the council and say, right, it looks as though you're going to get the ability to do this. 200, 300 people have been involved in this, and the associations in thinking this through before you start suddenly just coming up with a system. And the same to that to spread nationally, to say do it from the, you know, we all want to protect guests, we all want fair competition, you know, shape up or ship out, but work with us on how you get that, rather than something that either is overly costly, doesn't actually deliver on those things. So that's what this is about. Quite happy to carry on having those conversations. If not, anything else? Anything, Bruce, do you want to say anything before? Wind up? So just want to, sorry? Well, the next steps is we'll send out the presentation. We have working on a paper brief, but we wanted to have these meetings first. Because not being funny, if we send out the paper first, everything it was already a cooked thing, and it's not a cooked thing. And then the idea is to, well, I've got to talk to the council then to say, of these groups, could we have some people from public protection spread amongst them as well? So we work hand in gloves with the people. I have to say, and I don't, Cornwall Council Public Protection Department is a dream compared with other parts of the council. They really do want to go down a support, assist and regulate and punish at the back. So they are very open to working. And that's why we want to now sort of shape it that way. What I would do, as I said, sooner or later this is going to come. Sooner or later, unfortunately, something horrible will happen and it will come, but it will maybe come the wrong way then. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, every now and again, the council have to throw up the idea of proposing bed tax.
Yeah.
All this revenue, new revenue stream is sufficient for.
It should say that we are covering, it should say that that system is, yeah. No, that's why we disconnected from bed tax. It's probably why they're quite keen to get a registration scheme in, because then they would know. I don't like to say that's another benefit. I can see the bed tax per se is a very complicated thing for this country, because all tax should be fair. So that means, yeah, you could, but how do you do between campsite day visitors? So I think that debate will go on, but it's not an easy thing for this country. I know people talk about abroad, but and I don't think there's you know, at the current time, politically, adding another tax is not politically a very advantage.
This registration scheme is not going to generate enough cash to.
No, and it shouldn't. It should cover the administration and support and the robust bit, and that's it. That comes back to your point. It's not a cash till to go, we need another 100,000, 2 million, well, we'll chuck that fee up. That's why we want to do it this way, to say work with the sector, which is, you know, when I talk to the leaders and the people there, it is their way they want to do things. It's I'm not trying to be political, it's more that sort of culture. Same with the MPs. If businesses want it and want it done that way, that's what they like, rather than the regulator coming in. But yeah, there is talk about a bed tax. As I said, it's always one that goes down well with the public, because everybody likes to vote for a tax that you don't have to pay. I mean, personally, as somebody at 5'6", I bought a suit yesterday. Why am I subsidising taller people? You know, there should be a tax on about, you know, short people should get a tax rebate. No, just joking. But, you know, lots of people will construct something around what suits their argument. And I suppose that's the issue to my mind at the moment with this is, you know, there is a debate going on in Cornwall, which I hope will cool down this year after last year about, oh, tax them, get rid of them, ban them, you know. And we need a decent debate. There's not a peripheral region of any country that is attractive that doesn't have a bedrock within the hospitality and tourism sector. It is a valid sector, and you don't kill it off or milk it or do anything else with it. And that's where it's got to be responsible, and the rest of it, and this is part of the response mechanism. A lot of people are doing it very responsibly, but the new platforms allow people to leap on. If you want to be polite out of ignorance and not do it responsibly and legally, so it's legal and safe. Sorry, I've gone off on one, but. Okay, please feel free to have another cup of tea or a coffee or run away. And if you have parked in the car park, if you put your registration number on that pad, you shouldn't get done anyway. But if you put it on the clipboard, you won't be done. Oh, sorry. Car park tax. Yeah.
Thanks for all your help during the COVID as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really useful. On the Zoom meetings.
Yeah, and that's what we see. If you have some of those on some of these topic areas with public protection, you can help people, can't you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, just listen.
Yeah. Well, that was the classic case of rules changing all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, now I'm sort of looking at what we should be doing now.
Yeah.
Has everyone just stopped all the COVID stuff?
Yeah, basically.
Some
Well,
still seem to have it all on there. Some don't.
I mean, the main thing is increased cleaning should still go on.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I mean,
it's so
it's just-
difficult now, isn't it? It's so
Yeah.
difficult. Oh, I better do this thing. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.